evening, everybody, and welcome back to Stories at 7. I'm Miss Teresa from the New Deal Creative Arts Center, and tonight we're continuing to read Peter Pan. Tonight we'll be doing chapters 10 and 11. So here's chapter 10, The Never Bird. Out on the water, the boys had won their fight with Smee and Starkey, but they couldn't find Peter or Wendy or Hook. Taking the pirate's dinghy, they sailed home in it, shouting for Peter and Wendy the entire time. But there was no response except for the occasional mocking that came from the mermaids. They must be swimming or flying back, the boys concluded. Had they stayed in the lagoon, they may have soon heard two voices crying for help. Peter and Wendy, he injured and she weak, had climbed back onto Marooner's Rock. As the water rose dangerously around them, they fell unconscious, one right after the other. A mischievous mermaid pulled Wendy by her toe, trying to get her into the water. Feeling her slip from him, Peter woke up just in time to pull her back. "Our rock is shrinking," he told her. "Soon it will be gone." "Let's go then," Wendy cried. "We can swim or fly away." "I can do neither," Peter replied. "I have been injured. You go." But Wendy was too weak to make it on her own. The children put their hands over their eyes to shut out the sight of the rising water and prepared to meet their end. Just then, something brushed Peter's leg. It was as light as a feather, and it seemed to be asking, "Can I help?" What luck! It was the tail of a kite which Michael had made a few days earlier, but then lost it to the wind. Peter grabbed it and wrapped it around Wendy. "Now you," cried Wendy. "It can't lift us both," Peter explained. "Michael and Curly tried." Wendy clung to Peter, refusing to go without him, but he pushed her from the rock and away she flew. Peter was left all alone in the lagoon. The rock grew smaller and smaller. In the distance, the mermaids called sadly to the moon. Like any boy, Peter was scared to die. But soon his fear changed to excitement. "To die will be an awfully big adventure," he said. Around him, the lagoon grew quieter and quieter. Peter heard the mermaids saying good night to one another and shutting the doors to their coral caves. He heard the water gurgle greedily as it rose to nibble on the rock. Then he saw something white floating on the water. He thought it was a piece of paper or perhaps a piece of Michael's kite. But as he continued to stare at it, he realized it had a more definite sense of purpose than a mere piece of paper would have. It seemed to be fighting the tide instead of just going with the flow. Peter found himself rooting for the white streak to win. The piece of paper was actually the Never Bird, still sitting on her now floating nest. She was trying desperately to reach Peter. Although he had teased her in the past, he had also given orders that her nest was not to be disturbed. For this reason, and perhaps because she was above all things a mother, she would not disturb her nest herself, to save his life. "Swim to the nest," she called to him. "I am too tired to row all the way to you." But Peter didn't speak bird language and couldn't understand her, and even near death he could be very impatient. "What are you quacking about?" Peter asked rudely. "I don't understand a word." "Why, I never," the Never Bird said and tried again. "Same to you," Peter replied. "Whatever you just said." Remembering that he was only a child, the maternal Never Bird took a deep breath and made one last push to row her nest to the rock. Upon reaching it, she flew up, leaving her eggs behind to make some room for Peter. Finally realizing her meaning, Peter waved his thank you to the Never Bird. Looking down, however, he saw there was not enough room in the nest for both him and her two large white eggs. He lifted the eggs up, and the Never Bird covered her eyes with her feathers, afraid of what Peter might do. On the rock next to Peter was a waterproof hat, broad and wide, which Starkey had left behind. Peter put the eggs into the hat and set them afloat. With a final happy quack, the Never Bird swooped down and settled herself on top of her eggs. Peter got into the bird's old nest, waved goodbye, and pushed off. He in his nest and Wendy in her kite arrived back at the cave at nearly the same time. Oh, how everyone rejoiced! The party went on until Wendy realized how late it was and told everyone it was time to go to bed. The boys tried to stall, insisting they were injured and in need of slings and bandages, but Wendy would have none of it and sent them to bed. Chapter 11, The Happy Family. On the night that would come to be known as the night of all nights, the children ate a make-believe dinner. Unfortunately, their hunger was real, and as a result, they were noisy and misbehaving. "Be quiet," Wendy yelled finally, for she was hungry and grumpy too. "Is your plate empty, Slightly?" Slightly looked down at his imaginary plate. "Not quite, Mummy." "He didn't take one bite of his carrots," Nibs said. John raised his hand. "Since Peter isn't here, can I sit in his chair?" "Sit in Father's chair? No," replied Wendy, who had taken to referring to Peter as Father. "He's not our real father," John complained. Toodles wanted in too. "Can I be the father?" he asked. "No," Wendy said. "What about the baby?" he asked. "I'm the baby," Michael said. He was already settled in his comfortable basket. Toodles moped. "Slightly has his elbows on the table," someone reported. "The twins ate their dessert before their vegetables," someone else added. "Curly is eating all the butter and honey. Nibs is speaking with his mouth full." Wasn't this just like a normal family? Later, after the imaginary dishes were washed, Wendy sat by the fire and sewed socks with very real holes in them. As her boys played around her, she felt very content with her familiar little family. Just one thing was missing. Suddenly, she heard a step above them. "That's Peter's step," Wendy said. "Children, go greet your father at the door." Peter entered, dropping down through his own personal tree, and the children ran to him happily. He had brought nuts and treats for them, and from the crocodile, the correct time for Wendy. This he obtained by following the crocodile until he chimed the hour. "You spoil us, Peter," Wendy said. "We want to dance," the twins cried. "Go ahead," said Peter, who was in a jolly mood. "You and Mommy too." "Come on, Peter," Wendy said. "Children, go put your nightgowns on first." While the boys ran to do so, Peter and Wendy had a quiet moment alone. "Life is good, isn't it?" Peter said, warming his feet by the fire. "You, me, and the little ones." "It is," Wendy agreed. "I think Curly has your nose." "Michael takes after you," Peter said. But suddenly Peter looked scared. "Wendy," he said, "this is all make-believe, right? I'm not really their father." Wendy looked at him for a few seconds. "It's make-believe," she said finally. "Phew," cried Peter. "I can't tell you how relieved I am to hear that. It would make me feel so old to be their real father." "And how do you feel about me?" Wendy asked. Peter just blinked as if he didn't quite understand the question. Wendy sighed and went to sit at the other end of the room with her back to him. At that moment, the boys came out and sang and danced for Peter and Wendy in their nightgowns. When they had finished dancing, the boys got into bed for Wendy's good night story, the story that they loved best and which Peter hated. Usually when she told this story, he put his hands over his ears or left the room. Tonight, however, he stayed to listen. "Once upon a time, there was a gentleman," Wendy began. "I want a lady," Curly said. "I want white rats," said Nibs. "Shh," Wendy said. "Okay, there was a lady as well. Their names were Mr. and Mrs. Darling." On the other side of the room, Peter flinched. "Hey," John said, "I know them." "Me too," Michael said, but he didn't sound sure. "Mr. and Mrs. Darling were married and had 3 white rats?" Nibs cried hopefully. "Children," Wendy said. "And they had a nurse called Nana. But one day Mr. Darling got mad at Nana and chained her up in the yard, and so all the children flew away to Neverland." "That is a great story," said Nibs. "Imagine how sad these parents were after the children left," Wendy said. "Poor parents," the boys moaned, but they were just pretending to feel sorry. "It's an awfully sad story," the first twin said cheerfully. "If you knew how strong a mother's love is, you wouldn't worry," said Wendy. And now she came to the part that Peter hated most. "You see," Wendy said, "the mother left the window open so her children could fly back. One day," she closed her eyes. "Can't you see it? Can't you picture the happy scene when the children finally fly back home?" From Peter's corner came a hollow groan. "Are you in pain?" Wendy asked. "No, but you were wrong about mothers," He took a deep breath. A long time ago, I thought my mother would also keep the window open for me, so I stayed away and played. But when I flew back, the window was locked, and she had forgotten all about me, and another little boy was sleeping in my bed. Is that true or make-believe? Wendy asked, alarmed. Peter wasn't sure, but it sure scared all the children the same. So that's what mothers are like, they thought. Wendy, let's go home right now, John cried. Maybe it's too late and the window's already locked. Yes, she cried, clutching her brothers. She was so worried about the closed window that she didn't even think about Peter's feelings. Peter, will you arrange it? If you like, he replied coolly, as if she had asked him to pass the nuts. After all, she didn't care, neither would he. Upset at the idea of losing their mother, the boys surrounded Wendy threateningly. We won't let you go, they cried. We'll keep you a prisoner. Toodles, help, Wendy cried. Somehow, even though he was the silliest boy, she knew he was the right person to ask. Toodles stepped in between her and the rest of the boys. You'll have to go through me first, he said. Peter spoke up. We keep no girls here against their will. Since flying makes you so tired, I'll have the Indians guide you through the woods. Then Tink can take you across the sea. Thank you, Peter, Wendy said. She turned to the lost boys. Come with us, she offered. I am sure my parents will adopt you. This was meant mainly for Peter, but all of the boys jumped with joy. Peter, can we go? They pleaded. If you like, he repeated bitterly, and they rushed to pack. He, however, didn't move. Go pack, Peter, Wendy said in her low voice. I'm not going, he replied. Then, to show that he didn't care, he skipped around the room singing. But we can find your mother, Wendy begged. No, I don't like mothers. She would only tell me I have to grow up and stop having fun. The other boys watched this exchange nervously. Peter not coming? What would they do? Could they still go? Did they want to? Now then, Peter said, I'll have no fuss and no blubbering goodbyes. It was a pleasure to meet you, Wendy. He held out his hand formally. You'll take good care of yourself, she asked. Yes. Ready, Tinkerbell? Tinkerbell groaned from her cave. She resented having to help Wendy, but at least the girl would finally be gone. Then off you go. At just that moment, however, there was a clashing sound above. The pirates had attacked the Indians. The trip home was off, at least for now. And that's the end of chapter 11. Thank you so much for joining me again tonight. Please join me tomorrow and we will read chapters 12 and 13. Thanks, everybody. Good night.